Before I go to bed, let's read two chapters from Peter Pan. The 11th chapter is Wendy's Story. Listen then, said Wendy, settling down to her story with Michael at her feet and 7 boys in the bed. There was once a gentleman. I'd rather he had been a lady, Curly said. I wish he had been a white rat, said Nibs. Quiet. There was a lady also. And, oh, Mommy, cried the first twin. You mean that there is a lady also, don't you? She is not dead, is she? Oh no. Little less noise there, Peter called out, determined that she should have fair play. However beastly a story it might be in his opinion. The gentleman's name, Wendy continued, was Mr. Darling, and her name was Mrs. Darling. I knew them, John said, to annoy the others. I think I knew them, said Michael rather doubtfully. They were married, explained Wendy. And what do you think they had? White rats, cried Nibs, inspired. No, it's awfully puzzling, said Toodles, who knew the story by heart. Quiet, Toodles. They had 3 descendants. What is descendants? Well, you are one, twin. Did you hear that, John? I am a descendant. Descendants are only children, said John. Now these 3 children had a faithful nurse called Nana, but Mr. Darling was angry with her and chained her up in the yard, and so all the children flew away. It's an awfully good story, said Nibs. They flew away, Wendy continued, to the Neverland, where the lost children are. I just thought they did, Carly broke in excitedly. Oh, Wendy, cried Toodles. Was one of the lost children called Toodles? Yeah, he was. I'm in a story. Hooray! I'm in a story, Nibs. Shh. Now I want you to consider the feelings of the unhappy parents with all their children flown away. Oh, they all moaned, though they were not really considering the feelings of the unhappy parents one jot. It's awfully sad, the first twin said cheerfully. I don't see how it can have a happy ending, said the second twin. Do you, Nibs? I'm frightfully anxious. If you knew how great is a mother's love, Wendy told them triumphantly, you would have no fear. She had now come to the part that Peter hated. You see, Wendy said complacently, our heroine knew that the mother would always leave the window open for her children to fly back by. So they stayed away for years and had a lovely time. Did they ever go back? Let us now, said Wendy, bracing herself up for her finest effort, take a peep into the future, and they all give themselves the twist that makes peeps into the future easier. Years have rolled by, and who is this elegant lady of uncertain age alighting at London Station? Oh, Wendy, who is she? Cried Nibs, every bit as excited as if he did not know. Can it be? Yes, no, it is the fair Wendy. Oh. And who are the 2 noble portly figures accompanying her, now grown to man's estate? Can they be John and Michael? They are. Oh, that was the story, and they were as pleased with it as the fair narrator herself. Everything just as it should be. You see, off we skip like the most heartless things in the world, which is what children are, but so attractive, and we have an entirely selfish time. And then when we have need of special attention, we nobly return for it, confident that we shall be rewarded instead of smacked. So great indeed was their faith in a mother's love that they felt they could afford to be callous for a bit longer. But there was one there who knew better, and when Wendy finished, he uttered a hollow groan. What is it, Peter? She cried, running to him thinking he was ill. She felt him solicitously lower down than his chest. Where is it, Peter? It isn't that kind of pain, Peter replied darkly. And what kind is it? Wendy, you are wrong about mothers. They all gathered around him in a fright, so alarming was his agitation. And with a fine candor he told them what he had hitherto concealed. Long ago, he said, I thought like you that my mother would always keep the window open for me. So I stayed away for moons and moons and moons, and then flew back. But the window was barred, for mother had forgotten all about me, and there was another little boy sleeping in my bed. Are you sure mothers are like that? Yes, still it is best to be careful, and no one knows so quickly as a child when he should give in. Wendy, let us go home, cried John and Michael together. Yes, she said, clutching them. Not tonight, asked the lost boys, bewildered. They knew in what they called their hearts that one can get on quite well without a mother, and that it is only the mothers who think you can't. At once, Wendy replied, resolutely, for the horrible thought had come to her. Perhaps mother isn't half mourning by this time. This dread made her forgetful of what must be Peter's feeling, and she said to him rather sharply, Peter, will you make the necessary arrangements? If you wished it, he replied, as coolly as if she had asked him to pass the nuts. Not so much as sorry to lose you between them. If she did not mind the parting, he was going to show her, was Peter, that neither did he. But of course, he cared very much, and he was so full of wrath against grown-ups, who as usual were spoiling everything. Then having given the necessary instruction to the redskin, he returned to the home, where an unworthy scene had been enacted in his absence. Panic-stricken at the thought of losing Wendy, the lost boys had advanced upon her threateningly. It will be worse than before she came, they cried. We shall not let her go. Let's keep her prisoner. Chain her up. In her extremity, an instinct told her to which of them to turn. Toodle, she called, I appeal to you. I am just Toodles, and nobody minds me. But the first who does not behave to Wendy like an English gentleman, I will blood him severely. Then he drew back his hanger, and for that instant his sun was at noon. The others held back uneasily. Then Peter returned, and they saw at once that they would get no support from him. He would keep no girl in the Neverland against her will. Wendy, he said, striding up and down, I've asked a redskin to guide you through the wood, as flying tires you so. Thank you, Peter. Then Tinker Bell will take you across the sea. Wake her, Nibs. Nibs had to knock twice before he got an answer, though Tink had really been sitting up in bed listening for some time. Of course, Tink had been delighted to hear that Wendy was going, but she was jolly well determined not to be her courier, and she said so in still more offensive language. Then she pretended to be asleep again. She says she won't, Nib exclaimed, aghast at such insubordination, whereupon Peter went sternly toward the young lady's chamber. Taint, he rapped out, if you don't get up and dress at once, I will open the curtains, and then we shall all see you in negligee. This made her leap to the floor. Who said I wasn't getting up? She cried. In the meantime, the boys were gazing very furtively at Wendy, now equipped with John and Michael for the journey. By this time, they were dejected, not merely because they were about to lose her, but also because they felt that she was going off to something nice to which they had not been invited. Novelty was beckoning to them as usual. Crediting them with a nobler feeling, Wendy melted. Dear ones, she said, if you will all come with me, I feel almost sure I can get my father and mother to adopt you. The invitation was meant specifically for Peter, But each of the boys was thinking exclusively of himself, and at once they jumped with joy. Will they think us rather a handful? Nibs asked in the middle of his jump. Oh no, said Wendy, rapidly thinking it out. It will only mean having a few bets in the drawing room. Peter, can we go? They all cried imploringly. They took it for granted that if they went, he would go also, but really they scarcely cared. Thus children are ever ready, when novelty knocks, to desert their dearest ones. All right, Peter replied with a bitter smile, and immediately they rushed to get their things. And now get your things, Peter, she cried, shaking. No, he answered, pretending indifference. I am not going with you, Wendy. To show that her departure would leave him unmoved, he skipped up and down the room, playing gaily on his heartless pipes. To find your mother, Wendy coaxed. Now, if Peter had ever quite had a mother, he no longer missed her. He could do very well without one. He had thought them out and remembered only their bad points. Perhaps she would say I was old, and I just want always to be a little boy and to have fun. But Peter, no. So the others had to be told. Peter isn't coming. Peter not coming? They gazed blankly at him. There are sticks over their backs, and on each stick, a bundle. Their first thought was that if Peter was not going, he had probably changed his mind about letting them go. But he was far too proud for that. If you find your mothers, he said darkly, I hope you will like them. The awful cynicism of this made an uncomfortable impression, and most of them began to look rather doubtful. After all, their faces said, were they got noodles to want to go? Now then, cried Peter, no fuss, no blubbering. Goodbye, Wendy. And he held his hand cheerily, quite as if they must really go now, for he had something important to do. Ye will remember about changing your flannels, Peter, she said, lingering over him. Yes, and you will take your medicine. Yes. That seemed to be everything, and an awkward pause followed. Peter, however, was not the kind that breaks down before other people. Are you ready, Tinkerbell? He called out. Yes. Then lead the way. Tink darted at the nearest tree, but no one followed her, for it was at this moment the pirates made their dreadful attack upon the redskin, above where all had been so still. The air was sent with shrieks and the clash of steel. Below there was dead silence. Mouth opened and remained open. Wendy fell on her knees, but her arms were extended toward Peter. All arms were extended to him, as if suddenly blown in his direction. They were beseeching him mutely not to desert them. As for Peter, he seized his sword, the same he thought he had slain Barbecue with, and the lust the bat. The next chapter, chapter 12, the children are carried off. The pirate attack had been a complete surprise, a sure proof that the unscrupulous Hook had conducted it improperly. For to surprise Redskin fairly is beyond the wit of the white man. By all the unwritten laws of savage warfare, it is always the redskin who attacks, and with the willingness of his race, he does it just before the dawn, at which time he knows the courage of the whites to be at its lowest ebb. That this was the usual procedure was so well known to Hook that in disregarding it, he cannot be excused on the plea of ignorance. The Piccaninnies, on their part, trusted implicitly to his honor, and the whole action of the night stands out in marked contrast to him. They left nothing undone that was consistent with the reputation of their tribe. Here dreaming, though wide awake, of the exquisite torches to which they would have put him at break of day. Those confiding savages were found by the treacherous Hook. From the accounts afterward supplied by such of the scouts as escaped the carnage, He does not seem even to have paused at the rising ground. He pounded with no policy but to get into combat. What could the bewildered scouts do? Masters as they were of every warlike artifice save this one, but trot helplessly after him, exposing themselves fatally to view while they give pathetic utterance to the quiet cry. Around the brave Tiger Lily were a dozen of her stoutest warriors, and they suddenly saw the perfidious pirates bearing down upon them. Even then they had time to gather in a phalanx that would have been hard to break had they risen quickly. But this they were forbidden to do the same to do by the tradition of their race. It is written that the noble savage must never express surprise in the presence of the white, thus terrible as the sudden appearance of the pirates must have been to them. They remained stationary for a moment, not a muscle moving, as if the foe had come by invitation. And indeed, the tradition gallantly upheld. They seized their weapons, and the air was torn with the war cry. But it was now too late. It is no part of ours to describe what was a massacre rather than a fight, and thus perished many of the flower of the Buchanan tribe. Charlie fell to the tomahawk of the terrible panther, who ultimately cut away through the pirates with Tiger Lily and a small remnant of the tribe. To what extent Hook is to blame for his tactics on this occasion is for the historian to decide. What were his own feelings about himself at that triumph moment? Fain would his dogs have known, as breathing heavily and wiping their cutlasses, they gathered at a discreet distance from his hook, and squinted through their ferret eyes at this extraordinary man. Elation must have been in his heart, but his face did not reflect it. Ever a dark and solitary enigma, he stood aloof from his followers in spirit as in substance. The night's work was not yet over, for it was not the redskin he had come out to destroy. They were but the bees to be smoked, so that he should get all the honey at the honey. It was Pan he wanted, Pan and Wendy and their band, but chiefly Pan. Peter was such a small boy that no one tends to wonder at the man's hatred of him. True, he had flung Hook's arm to the crocodile, but even this, and the increased insecurity of life which it led, owning to the crocodile pertinacity, hardly account for a vindictiveness so relentless and malignant. The truth is that there was something about Peter which goaded the pirate captain to frenzy. It was not his courage, it was not his engaging appearance, it was not. There was no beating about the bush, for we know quite well what it was. We have got to tell. It was Peter's cockiness. This had got on Hook's nerves. It made him iron claw twitch, and at night it disturbed him like an insect. The question now was how to get down the trees, or how to get his dogs down. He ran his greedy eyes over them, searching for the thinnest ones. They wriggled uncomfortably, for they knew he would not scruple to ram them down with poles. In the meantime, what of the boys? We have seen them at the first clang of the weapons, turned as it were into stone figures, open-mouthed, all appealing with outstretched arms to Peter, and we return to them as their mouth closed, and their arms fall to their sides. Which side has won? The parrot, listening avidly at the mouth of the trees, heard the question put by every boy, and at last they also heard Peter's answer. If the redskin have won, he said, it will beat the tom-tom. It is always their sign of victory. Now Smee had found the tom-tom, and was at that moment sitting on it. You will never hear the tom-tom again, he muttered, but inaudibly, of course, for strict silence had been enjoined. To his amazement, Hook signed him to beat the tom-tom, and slowly there came to Smee an understanding of the dreadful wickedness of the Odom. Never probably had this simple man admire Hook so much. Twice me beat upon the instrument and then stopped to listen gleefully. The tom-tom, the miscreants heard Peter cry, an Indian victory. The doomed children answered with a cheer that was music to the black hearts above, and almost immediately they repeated their goodbyes to Peter. This puzzled the pirates, but all their other feelings were swallowed up by a base delight that the enemy were about to come up the trees. They smirked at each other and rubbed their hands rapidly and silently. Hook gave his orders, one man to each tree, and the others to arrange themselves in a line 2 yards apart. And that's the end. The 13th chapter will be, do you believe in fairies? Do you believe in fairies? Let's find out.